The familiar hum of the Starweaver's engines was James Harrison's only companion as he guided his cargo ship through the crowded lanes of Centauri Station's departure zone. Another routine delivery completed, another payment secured. The life of a freelance cargo pilot wasn't glamorous, but it kept him far from Earth and the memories he'd left behind. The former Special Forces commander had traded his military uniform for a weathered leather jacket and the relative simplicity of independent shipping. Yet his combat-honed instincts never truly faded, and right now, they were screaming that something was wrong. The cargo hold's thermal sensors had been showing slight anomalies for the past hour. Nothing major, just enough variance to suggest something, or someone, was creating excess heat in a supposedly empty compartment. James had learned long ago that coincidences in space usually meant trouble. Setting the ship to autopilot once clear of the station's traffic, James retrieved his pulse pistol from its hidden compartment beneath the pilot's console. He moved silently through the ship's narrow corridors, his footsteps masked by the engine's steady drone. The cargo hold was dimly lit, stacks of empty containers casting long shadows across the metal floor. James methodically checked each corner, each potential hiding spot, until a soft sound from behind a stack of crates caught his attention. In one fluid motion, he rounded the corner, weapon raised. What he found stopped him cold. A figure lay curled against the wall, wrapped in what appeared to be some kind of ceremonial cloak. But it was her appearance that made James's breath catch. Her skin had a subtle iridescent quality, shifting between pale blue and silver in the low light. An Etherian. He'd seen her kind before, but only in news broadcasts and diplomatic feeds. She was clearly injured, one hand pressed against her side where a dark stain spread across her ornate clothing. As James approached, her eyes snapped open, striking violet orbs that seemed to pierce right through him. She tried to scramble away but winced in pain. "Easy," James said, lowering his weapon. "I'm not going to hurt you." The Etherian studied him for a moment, her expression a mix of wariness and desperation. When she spoke, her voice was melodic despite her obvious distress. "You must help me. They will kill me if they find me." "Who's trying to kill you?" James asked, already knowing he was going to regret getting involved. Nothing complicated, a simple cargo run like a mysterious alien stowaway with assassins on her tail. "The Shadow Guard," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They serve those who would see my world burn rather than change." She struggled to sit up straighter, revealing an ornate pendant that marked her as Etherian royalty. "I am Nyara, first daughter of the High Council. And I carry information that could prevent a war between our peoples." James ran a hand through his graying hair, years of military experience warring with his hard-earned policy of avoiding political entanglements. But there was something in those violet eyes that spoke of genuine fear, and genuine conviction. The ship's proximity alarm chose that moment to blare through the hold. James rushed to a nearby viewport, cursing under his breath as he spotted 3 sleek, black vessels emerging from behind a cluster of asteroids. Their design was unmistakably Etherian, but their hulls bore no official markings. "Your friends, I assume?" he asked, already calculating combat vectors in his head. Nyara nodded grimly. "The Shadow Guard never stops hunting their prey." James checked his weapon's charge and helped Nyara to her feet. "Well, Princess, looks like you've just hired yourself a new protector. Let's get you to the medical bay before our uninvited guests decide to skip the pleasantries." As they made their way through the ship, James couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to become exponentially more complicated. But watching the wounded princess struggle to walk despite her obvious pain, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. Some things were worth the risk, worth fighting for, even if you didn't yet understand why. The pursuing ships opened fire as James settled Nyara into the medical bay's treatment pod. The Starweaver shuddered under the impact, and James allowed himself a grim smile. It had been years since he'd had to fly combat maneuvers, but some skills you never truly forgot. "Hold tight, "Princess," he said, securing the pod's restraints. "This is going to get interesting." As he sprinted toward the bridge, James reflected that interesting was probably an understatement. He was about to engage in combat with elite alien assassins while protecting a royal fugitive who claimed to have information vital to preventing an interstellar war. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded suspiciously like his old commanding officer was laughing at how thoroughly he'd failed at maintaining a quiet, peaceful retirement. The Starweaver's engines roared to full power as James took manual control, and the game of cat and mouse began among the asteroids. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: his life would never be the same. The Starweaver danced through the asteroid field, energy bolts from the pursuing vessels illuminating the void around them. James's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, decades of combat experience flowing through his muscle memory. The cargo ship wasn't built for dogfighting, but he'd made a few modifications over the years that were about to prove their worth. "Targeting systems locked," the ship's AI announced. "Multiple hostile signatures detected." James pulled the ship into a tight spiral around a massive asteroid, using its bulk as cover. "Deploy countermeasures, pattern Delta. Let's see how they handle a little confusion." The Starweaver released a cloud of sensor-jamming particles, temporarily blinding the pursuing vessels. James used the moment of confusion to dive deeper into the asteroid field, taking increasingly risky paths through the tumbling rocks. A pained gasp from behind made him turn. Nyara stood in the bridge doorway, one hand braced against the wall for support. Despite the medical pod's initial treatment, she still looked pale, her iridescent skin lacking its natural luster. "You should be resting," James said, returning his attention to piloting. "I cannot rest while you risk your life for me." Nyara made her way to the co-pilot's seat, moving with a grace that belied her injuries. "The Shadow Guard, they are not mere assassins. They possess technologies your sensors cannot detect." As if to prove her point, one of the pursuing ships suddenly materialized directly ahead of them, its cloaking field dissolving like morning mist. James yanked the controls hard, sending the Starweaver into a roll that barely avoided a collision. "Now they tell me," he muttered, executing a series of evasive maneuvers. "Any other surprises I should know about?" Nyara's hands flew across the co-pilot's console, her movements swift and sure. "Their ships are linked through a quantum network. They can coordinate their attacks with perfect precision." She paused, looking at James with those penetrating violet eyes. "But they are bound by protocols, patterns of attack that can be predicted if you know what to look for." James raised an eyebrow. "And I assume you know these patterns?" A ghost of a smile crossed Nyara's face. "I was to be named High Commander of our defense forces before." She trailed off, pain flickering across her features that had nothing to do with her physical wounds. "Before you discovered something they wanted to keep hidden," James finished for her, understanding dawning. "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Nyara nodded grimly. "My people have long been divided between those who seek closer ties with humanity and those who view your species as a threat. But what I discovered..." She shuddered. "There are those in power who would manufacture a war between our peoples, using biological weapons designed to target specific genetic markers." James processed this information while threading the Starweaver through a particularly dense cluster of asteroids. "And I'm guessing these weapons would affect humans and Etherians differently? They would devastate human populations while leaving my people unharmed." Nyara's voice was thick with disgust. "When I found the evidence, I knew I had to get it to someone who could help expose the truth. But the Shadow Guard were waiting. They've been pursuing me across 3 star systems." A warning klaxon blared as one of the pursuing ships scored a glancing hit on their shields. James diverted power to the defensive systems, his mind racing through options. "We need to shake these guys before we can even think about exposing any conspiracies." "How good are they at atmospheric combat?" Nyara's eyes widened. The Shadow Guard rarely operate within planetary atmospheres. Their ships are optimized for void combat. Good. James plotted a new course, aiming for a nearby gas giant. Because I'm about to do something extremely stupid. The Starweaver plunged into the gas giant's upper atmosphere, the ship's hull groaning under the sudden pressure. Behind them, the Shadow Guard vessels followed, but their movements became noticeably less precise in the turbulent conditions. James pushed his ship deeper into the atmosphere, riding the violent currents while monitoring the hull integrity. Nyara worked beside him, making constant adjustments to their shield harmonics to compensate for the intense pressures. They worked in seamless coordination, as if they'd flown together for years instead of minutes. James found himself stealing glances at her when he could, admiring the intensity of her concentration, the way her bioluminescent skin seemed to pulse in rhythm with the ship's systems. A massive lightning storm raged around them, bolts of energy larger than cities arcing through the colorful gases. James used the electromagnetic interference to his advantage, leading their pursuers into increasingly hazardous conditions. One by one, the Shadow Guard ships were forced to pull back, their more delicate systems unable to handle the punishment. Soon, only a single pursuer remained, stubbornly matching their every move. That pilot is good, James admitted grudgingly. Too good to shake through normal means. Nyara's expression hardened. That would be Kronth, the Shadow Guard's elite hunter. He has personally eliminated dozens of threats to the old order. She turned to James, her eyes intense. He will not stop. Ever. James set his jaw, an old familiar tension settling into his muscles. Then we'll have to make him stop. He began powering up the ship's rarely used weapons systems. I don't suppose you have any experience with cargo ship targeting arrays? For the first time since he'd found her, Nyara smiled fully, her face transforming with an almost predatory anticipation. I am a quick study, James Harrison. Show me what your ship can do. As they prepared for their counterattack, James couldn't help but feel that this mysterious alien princess was about to change his life in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. And somehow, that didn't seem like such a bad thing anymore. The hidden research facility on Helios 6 hung in perpetual twilight, its location in the planet's terminator zone ensuring it never saw full day or night. The Starweaver approached under cloak, its hull still bearing scars from their encounter with Kronth in the gas giant's atmosphere. James watched Nyara prepare her infiltration gear, her movements precise and efficient. The past week of evading Shadow Guard patrols had proven she was far more than just a political figure, she was a warrior in her own right. Her wounds had healed, revealing a strength that matched her determination. The facility's security systems will be keyed to Etherian biosignatures, Nyara explained, checking her modified scanner. They never expected a human to attempt infiltration. Their mistake. James secured his tactical vest, the familiar weight of combat gear bringing back memories of countless Special Forces operations. You're sure the evidence is here? Nyara nodded, her expression grim. This is where they developed the bioweapons. My contact inside the facility confirmed it before they. She paused, pain flickering across her features. Before they were discovered. James placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the subtle warmth that all Etherians radiated. We'll make their sacrifice count. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the tension between them had nothing to do with their mission. Since their battle with Kronth, something had shifted in their relationship. Small touches lingered longer than necessary. Glances held more meaning than words could express. The moment passed as the facility's massive bulk filled their viewport. James focused on the task at hand, guiding the Starweaver into a maintenance dock they'd identified as minimal security risk. As they prepared to disembark, Nyara grabbed his arm. James, she said softly, if something goes wrong. The evidence must reach the Coalition Council. Promise me you'll. Nothing's going wrong, he interrupted firmly. We go in together, we come out together. That's the plan. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You humans and your stubborn optimism. Hey, it's worked so far. They moved through the facility's maintenance tunnels like shadows, Nyara's knowledge of Etherian security protocols proving invaluable. James couldn't help but admire how she seemed to flow through the darkness, her natural bioluminescence dimmed to near invisibility through some trick of Etherian biology. The research levels were eerily quiet, their footsteps echoing despite their best efforts at stealth. They encountered no security patrols, a fact that set James's combat instincts on high alert. It's too easy, he whispered as they approached the main laboratory. Where is everyone? Nyara's expression was troubled as she interfaced with the lab's security panel. Perhaps she stopped abruptly, her eyes widening as the door slid open. No. The laboratory was a scene of carefully orchestrated destruction. Shattered equipment littered the floor, and every data terminal had been systematically destroyed. But what caught James's attention was the body sprawled near a central console, an Etherian scientist, their iridescent skin dulled in death. They're destroying the evidence, Nyara said, her voice tight with anger and grief. She rushed to an intact terminal, her fingers flying across its surface. But they couldn't have wiped everything. There has to be something. James kept watch at the door, his pulse pistol ready. How long do you need? I don't, she stopped suddenly, her breath catching. James, look at this. He moved to her side, studying the terminal display. His blood ran cold as he processed what he was seeing. The bioweapon research wasn't just a rogue operation by conservative elements within Etherian society. The data showed links to human corporations, military contractors, and even some coalition council members. It's not just about preventing alliance between our peoples, Nyara said, her voice barely a whisper. They're planning to use the conflict to seize power in both our governments. The weapon release would just be the beginning. Download everything you can, James ordered, already planning their escape route. We need to. The facility's lights suddenly flared to full brightness, and alarms began blaring throughout the complex. A familiar voice echoed through the laboratory's speakers. Did you really think we wouldn't be watching this facility? Crunt's tone was almost conversational. I must admit, you've led us on quite a chase, Princess. But now it ends. Security doors slammed shut around them as emergency force fields sprang to life. James spun in place, tracking multiple threats as armed figures began teleporting into the lab. Nyara, he said quietly, positioning himself between her and the closest troops, please tell me you got what we came for. Partial download complete, she confirmed, her own weapon drawn. But we'll need to survive to use it. The Shadow Guard forces surrounded them, their weapons charged and ready. Crunt himself stepped through their ranks, his ceremonial armor making him seem more demon than warrior in the harsh laboratory lights. Your interference in matters beyond your understanding ends here, Crunt announced. Though I must admit, Princess, your choice of human ally has proved interesting. Perhaps we should keep him alive for study. After all, we'll need to test the weapon's effectiveness on various human subjects. James felt Nyara tense beside him, her anger palpable in the air between them. He knew they were badly outnumbered, their chances of survival minimal. But as he glanced at the proud Etherian princess who had crashed into his life and changed everything, he realized he wouldn't have chosen any other path. So, he said, a dangerous smile crossing his face, I guess this is a bad time to mention the explosives I planted on our way in? Crunt's eyes widened just as the first detonation rocked the facility. The laboratory erupted into chaos as James's explosives detonated in sequence throughout the facility. Emergency lighting cast wild shadows across the room as Shadow Guard troops scrambled for cover. James seized the moment of confusion, tackling Nyara behind a fallen section of ceiling just as energy weapons fire filled the air where they'd been standing. Your timing remains impeccable, Nyara said, returning fire with precision that dropped 2 Shadow Guard agents. Her free hand flew across her portable computer, interfacing with the facility's systems. The explosions have disrupted their containment fields. We have a path to the auxiliary landing bay. James fired a sustained burst that forced Crunth and his remaining troops to dive for cover. Then what are we waiting for? They moved as one, covering each other's advance through the wreckage of the lab. Years of combat experience guided James's movements, but he found himself constantly aware of Nyara's position, anticipating her actions as if they'd fought together for years instead of days. The humans' explosives were predictable. Crunth's voice boomed through the facility's speakers. As was your attempt to access our secure data. Did you really think we wouldn't have countermeasures in place? A new alarm began blaring through the complex. Nyara's eyes widened as she read the alert on her computer. They're initiating a complete data purge. The evidence we downloaded, it's being corrupted. Can you stop it? James asked, leading them down a smoke-filled corridor. Not remotely. We need to reach the central server room. Nyara hesitated, conflict clear on her face. It's in the opposite direction from the landing bay. James didn't hesitate. Then that's where we're going. They altered course, fighting their way through waves of security forces. The facility's damage worked to their advantage, with fallen debris and damaged systems creating chaos that favored their 2-person team over larger groups. As they approached the server room, Nyara suddenly stumbled. James caught her, noticing for the first time the energy weapon burn on her side. You're hit. It's nothing, she insisted, though her usually bright skin had dulled noticeably. We have to keep moving. James helped her to cover as another patrol passed their position. This isn't nothing. You need medical attention. What I need is to complete my mission. Nyara's violet eyes met his, filled with determination and something else, something that made his heart race. Too many have died to expose this conspiracy. I won't let their sacrifices be in vain. James wanted to argue, to insist that her life was worth more than any mission. But he recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same one he'd worn countless times during his military career. Instead, he pulled a medkit from his tactical vest and quickly applied emergency sealant to her wound. Just try not to get shot again, he said gruffly, trying to hide how his hands shook slightly as he touched her. I'm running low on bandages. Her hand caught his before he could pull away. For a moment, they stayed frozen in that position, the chaos of battle seeming to fade around them. Then Nyara did something completely unexpected. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, an intimate gesture among her people. Thank you, she whispered, for believing in me when no one else would. The moment was shattered by an explosion that rocked the corridor. They broke apart as Crunth himself rounded the corner, his ceremonial armor scorched but intact. How touching, the Shadow Guard commander sneered. The princess and her human pet, sharing a romantic moment amidst the destruction of everything they hoped to achieve. More troops were arriving behind him, cutting off their escape routes. James and Nyara pressed back to back, weapons ready but dramatically outnumbered. The data purge is nearly complete, Crunth continued. Soon, all evidence of our work here will be gone. And then. He raised his weapon. Well, I'm sure we can craft a suitable story about terrorists attacking a medical research facility. Perhaps even use it to accelerate our plans for war. You're wrong about one thing, James said, a plan forming in his mind. We've already achieved everything we came for. Crunth's eyes narrowed. Explain. The download wasn't corrupted, it was a decoy. The real data was transmitted to the Starweaver the moment we entered the facility. By now, it's been broadcast to every major news network in both our systems. It was a complete bluff, but James could feel Nyara tense behind him, understanding his play. Crunth's composure cracked slightly, uncertainty crossing his features. You're lying. Am I? Why do you think we came in here with such a small team? Why draw attention to ourselves trying to download the data when we already had it? James allowed himself a confident smile. You were so busy watching us, you never thought to check what my ship was doing. Crunt's weapon wavered as he activated his communicator, demanding status reports. In that moment of distraction, Nyara moved with blinding speed. Her hand found a panel in the wall, and suddenly the corridor's gravity plating reversed. As everyone except their magnetically anchored boots was thrown to the ceiling, James and Nyara made their move. They fought their way through the disoriented troops, making a desperate run for the server room. But even as they ran, James knew their victory had come at a cost. Now Crunt would be checking their bluff, and when he discovered the truth, his revenge would be terrible. Looking at Nyara as they ran, seeing the mix of pain and determination on her face, James made a silent vow. Whatever happened next, he would make sure she survived to complete her mission. Some things were worth any sacrifice. The server room's massive data cores towered around them like crystalline monoliths, their surfaces reflecting the emergency lighting in fractured patterns. James sealed the doors behind them while Nyara immediately went to work at the main terminal, her fingers dancing across the alien interface. How long? James asked, setting up defensive positions with what little equipment they had left. The purge is at 80%. I might be able to salvage some of the core data, but... She paused, frustration evident in her voice. We need more time. The sealed doors shuddered under heavy impact. Crunt's forces had recovered quickly, and James knew the doors wouldn't hold for long. He checked his weapon's charge, barely enough for one good firefight. Time is one thing we don't have, Princess. He moved to her side, watching the progress bars crawl across her screen. Tell me you have a backup plan. Nyara's hands stilled over the controls, her expression grave. There is one way. The facility's quantum processing core. If I can interface directly with it, I could potentially reconstruct the purged data. Why do I sense a but coming? The interface would require an Ethereum's natural bioelectric field. The process would be extremely dangerous. She met his eyes. Potentially fatal. James felt his heart constrict. No. We'll find another way. There is no other way. Nyara's voice was gentle but firm. The evidence in these servers could prevent a war that would kill billions. My life is a small price to pay. The doors groaned under another assault. Warning indicators showed they had less than a minute before breach. James looked at Nyara, really looked at her. Despite her injuries, despite everything they'd been through, she stood tall, every inch the princess and warrior he'd come to love. The realization hit him with startling clarity. Somewhere between saving her life and fighting by her side, between quiet moments in the Starweaver and desperate battles against impossible odds, he'd fallen in love with her. You're right, he said quietly. One life is a small price. Then he drew his sidearm and shot the terminal she was working at. James. Nyara spun to face him, shock and anger warring on her features. What are you? Your people need you, he cut her off, already moving toward the quantum core. You're the only one who can ensure this evidence reaches the right people, who can guide both our species through the aftermath. Me? He smiled sadly. I'm just a washed-up soldier who finally found something worth dying for. Understanding dawned in her violet eyes. No. James, you don't understand. The interface requires an Ethereum's biological. Yeah, about that. He pulled a small device from his tactical vest. Remember that medical pod that treated you on the Starweaver? It didn't just heal you. It collected samples of your bioelectric field. Standard procedure for alien medical treatment. He held up the device. This contains a synthesized version. Not as stable as the real thing, but it should work long enough to matter. The doors exploded inward. Krunth and his forces poured into the server room, weapons raised. James saw Nyara move to stand with him, but he was faster. In one fluid motion, he shoved her behind a data core and activated the device. Raw energy coursed through him as the synthesized Etherian field enveloped his body. The pain was extraordinary, but he forced himself to focus, to complete the interface with the quantum core. Stop him. Krunth's voice seemed distant through the haze of agony. He'll destroy everything. Energy weapons fire filled the air, but James barely noticed. His consciousness was expanding, merging with the facility's systems. He could feel the purged data, fragments scattered across quantum storage, and began pulling them back together through sheer force of will. Through eyes that no longer seemed quite human, he saw Nyara fighting like a force of nature, keeping Krunth's forces at bay. She was magnificent, terrible in her fury, and he knew he'd made the right choice. The reconstructed data began flowing through the facility's communication arrays, broadcasting to every channel he could access. Evidence of the conspiracy, proof of the planned genocide, all of it streaming out into the galaxy where it could never be erased again. The synthesized field was breaking down, taking his body with it. James felt his cells beginning to rupture, his very DNA unwinding under the strain. But he held on, determined to complete the transmission. James. Nyara's voice reached him through the maelstrom of data and pain. She had fought her way to his side, her hands grasping his shoulders. Let go. You've done enough. Not, quite, everything. With his last surge of strength, James accessed the facility's reactor controls. As his consciousness began to fade, he looked at Nyara one final time. Run. The quantum core overloaded in a cascade of energy, the explosion contained just long enough for Nyara to escape with the most crucial evidence. The facility's destruction would ensure no trace of the bioweapon research survived, while the transmitted data would expose the conspiracy to the galaxy. Months later, as peace talks between humans and Etherians proceeded under the watchful eye of Princess Nyara, rumors persisted of a mysterious figure seen in the outer colonies. A human who moved with military precision, his skin occasionally shimming with an iridescent glow. But such rumors were surely impossible. After all, no human could survive interfacing with Etherian quantum technology. Yet Nyara kept searching, hope burning in her heart. For she had learned one truth that transcended both their species: love, like heroes, had a habit of surviving against impossible odds.